All right, welcome to the June 30th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll just do a quick, I'm going to do a quick audio test, make sure my audio is coming through the stream, and we'll get started here in a few minutes and let people get logged in. Bear with me just for a minute. All right. My name is Greg Ondo. I'll be hosting the Hangout today. I'm broadcasting from outside of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. How the Hangout works, if you haven't been on one before, is you can just kind of ask different questions in the live chat field. We had a couple people that had sent questions in advance. So we'll get to those, but if you want to send questions in advance, we could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. This is a live hangout. It will be available to watch afterwards. So if you want to watch it afterwards, you may want to skip it. If you're not watching it live, you may want to skip ahead to about 10 minutes. Otherwise, we're going to be letting people get logged in as we go through this. So for those people that are watching live, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, that'd be helpful. That's always good. And you could also start to ask questions in the live chat field. If we could try to avoid, we'll try to go through the questions chronologically. So if you ask the same question repeatedly in the chat field, it won't increase your chances of getting that question answered earlier. So just a FYI on that. If we could try to refrain from doing that, that would be appreciated. Just makes kind of going through the comments field much easier. And probably like many of you during this time, my family is home. So my wife is working directly above me. So you may hear her walking. You may hear footsteps above us or in some conference calls. And my son is also at home. So he started a Disney movie just a couple minutes ago. So we'll probably get interrupted during the Hangout. So I'll try to get him a new movie started right after the Hangout. So I'll apologize in advance for any interruptions. So we will go ahead and let people get logged in, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. So let's see who's on our Hangout today. I think we saw some returning people. All right, so we see Ace. Okay, we also, so we have Pinda. Hope I'm saying your name right. All right, so we have Robbie from Dallas. So we have Ted Springman from, I believe he's in Sherman Oaks, if memory serves right. All right, so let's see. All right, so we have South Africa. We'll see if we get maybe 5 continents for our live hangout here. So it looks like we have North America, we have Africa. Let's see who else. Okay. All right, so we have Turkey, we have Matt from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Kenosha, Colombia, South America. All right, so we have 3 continents. We have Slovenia, that makes 4. We have Taylor from Pine Grove. All right, so we have the UK, we have Manchester. Okay, so we have Pittsburgh, California. All right, so we have Montenegro, Finland, Sherman Oaks. All right, so Switzerland, South Africa, London, Ghana, Russia. All right, so we have Colombia, Riverside, California, Los Angeles. All right, so we have Australia. So I think we've hit 4 continents. Just need someone from Asia to get our 5th continent. I don't think we've had anyone live from Antarctica, but I'm trying. So question, Greg, are the questions we sent on email reserved for towards the end of the Hangout or random? I usually kind of try to get them in. Sometimes depends on, they often come up towards the end, but it's not really any particular reason other than I look at the clock and say, oh, I had to get through all those questions people sent me in. So, all right, so we have Pablo from España. All right, so Greater London, Berkshire. We have Canada, Sweden, India. All right, so we hit the Asian continent. Good. Okay. All right, so Pinder. All right, I hope that's pronouncing it right. Sorry. Thanks for letting me know. Trying not to be so ignorant all the time. All right, so Denmark, Holland, India. Okay, San Diego. All right, so more people getting logged in. One other note, in the United States where I live, Friday, most people are taking a holiday for the 4th of July. So instead of just canceling the Hangout, I'm going to be doing it on Thursday. So look for a Hangout on Thursday. And then the following week, I have to go to a closing on a house I'm selling on Tuesday. So probably the next 2 Hangouts will be Thursday and Monday. So just want to let everyone know that. We'll try to make it a little more obvious. All right, so we have Mexico. All right, so we have the Basque Country. All right, Sir Robert from Atlanta. Get started here in about 2 minutes. All right, from Quebec City. Norway, Iran. Okay, some more people getting logged in. I'm just going to lock my door real quick so I don't have any other interruptions. Bear with me. Okay, so we have Seattle, Israel, Romania, Virginia Beach. Been to Virginia Beach many times. Used to do a lot of studio work there. Tanzania. Rhode Island. Okay, we'll get started here. Maybe another minute. Okay. Well, I guess we could go ahead and get started now. Okay. So just a couple questions that were sent in before the Hangout. Hi, Greg. How can I record system audio or internal sound on Windows 10 and Cubase 10.5? Thanks a lot. What a lot of people end up doing, generally the Cubase audio communications is separate from what we see in the, for the system audio, and generally like the system audio in Windows can have higher latencies and it's not really designed necessarily for DAW use. So they run on, so generally Cubase will be running on an ASIO driver. So if you have an audio interface with an ASIO driver, that's ideally the best way to go. You can use the generic low latency ASIO driver if you have a laptop and you wanted to use the built-in audio while traveling. You could have that too. So what I know a lot of people do if they want to record like the internal system sounds is just simply hook up a cable from the headphone output into their audio interface. If you don't have a separate audio interface, you may want to, that's probably the most common method. Some people, I believe, on Windows 10 will use a utility called Voicemeeter Pro, which will allow you to kind of route audio from different sources and different applications into each other. I'm not an expert on that by any means, but that may be another option for you. So look at like an internal routing utility like Voicemeeter Pro, or check out just physically patching a cable between the headphone out of your interface to the line levels of the headphone out of your built-in interface, and keep your Windows system sounds maybe directed there, and then patch that directly into your audio interface. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Could you please show me how to convert a live violin wave recording to MIDI and then have Halion VST play the part? Okay, so let's just come over here. Let's say if I have, I don't have just like a solo violin part, but if I wanted to come here, let's say if I had maybe a saxophone. So if I want to take that audio performance and have it play back through Halion or Halion Sonic, I could go directly into, we'll go into our sample editor and we go into Very Audio. And at this point within Very Audio under functions, you'll see this function just to extract MIDI. So we could choose to say I wanted this to do like my notes in VST3 tuning curve. We could retain the original dynamic velocities as well. We could also have note expression 3 volume. So when we come over here, we can now, that would automatically place that. And I think I may have just a quick saxophone track loaded up here. So as we listen to this, that's the MIDI extraction of our saxophone. So that's both of them playing together. So once you're in the Very Audio editor, just simply, again, so if I click here, we go to the Very Audio. And at that point, just under functions, just to choose extract MIDI. And then you could turn that right into different MIDI data on the project window. Okay, so let's move on. Next question. Hi, I've got a question about quantizing acoustic guitar fingerstyle. Audio warping gives me some artifacts along the low notes. What other techniques would you suggest for getting acoustic guitar in time? It can really depend on the part itself. Let me just go to a project where I may have some acoustic guitar. Sometimes it's not always easy to magically quantize acoustic guitar parts that are a little bit off. But so, if you wanted to try to, and it could really depend upon the part itself. So let's say if I think with this, I may have just some strumming. And let me just check my connections here really quickly. So if I were to kind of, zoom in, depending on what you're doing, you could, as you mentioned, kind of going into the audio warp. So if you go to audio warp, I would play around some with like free warping. And what this will allow you to do is, as you want to kind of move different points, you could kind of set an anchor point. So if you wanted this to be perhaps, just undo that last anchor point. Yeah, so if I wanted this a little bit ahead of the beat or this behind the beat, so you could kind of set different anchor points as you see fit like this. And it could be a bit of a tedious process if you really wanted to change the feel, but just kind of doing stuff like this can make a big difference. So let's go ahead and just listen to it, see if it's... So if I wanted this note to be more anticipatory of the beat, I could just kind of place an anchor point here to leave that section and just kind of move that. So as we listen to it. So those are some things that I would do, but every part may be a little different. But I would play around, go to the audio warp, and just try to do free warping. And I think that will probably get you in the ballpark pretty easily. So, all right, so let's come over here. I'll just revert this quickly. And let's go to the next question. Okay, it says, hi Greg, running Cubase 10 on Windows 10 PC. The latest version of Contact 6 has been directly blacklisted. I succeeded to whitelisted, but it stays in red in the plugin list. Got an idea what is going wrong. Make sure that first thing you have, if you're running Cubase 10 and Windows 10, generally, lots of people run Contact without any incident in Cubase. So I think most Contact users are running their large libraries inside of Cubase, but make sure if there's a 64-bit and a 32-bit version that you have the 32-bit version disabled and are using only the 64-bit. So generally, if you're running a bridging software such as JBridge, you may automatically install the 32-bit and 64-bit versions of Contact, and the 32-bit could be blacklisted pretty much by default, because I think since 9.5, Cubase has dropped support for 32-bit versions. It could be a version or two off. But generally, most people run Contact without any incidents inside of Cubase. I don't think Contact is still version 3. It's not a VST3, so you're going to be running a VST2. But make sure that you don't have the 32-bit version running as well, because that will, get blacklisted. Okay, so question, part 1. When recording a guitar track, I sometimes prefer multi-tracks than punching in on the same track of events, overlap and light gaps, and then sometimes the volumes differ as I record. What is the best way to equalize all the volumes? How would you go about recording multiple takes and consolidate to make one guitar track using lanes? Is using the lanes the answer to my problem? So I think the lanes will probably make the most sense. So let me just open up. I think I may have like a comping scenario here where I did kind of with bass. So as I come along here, let's say I have multiple takes of this particular bass part. And if I want to, so I've recorded these into different lanes. So as we go to record just a little bit of audio here. So let's say I'll just punch in and out here. So let's get I and O, and let's say we just do a quick recording. And I could do this in cycle mode, or it doesn't have to be in cycle mode. I could just do several different passes. Okay, so let's say we'll record there. And if I wanted to do another pass, So we have several different recordings, and now when I click here, they're all going to be on different lanes. So as we want to do editing, you have it dedicated. We see this little hand tool. This is what's called the comping tool. And this will allow you to kind of take different parts here and to select. You could use some of the modifier keys like Control or Command to audition different components. So if you wanted to select kind of different takes from different performances, you could have that done directly there. And then if you notice like volume discrepancies after kind of doing a comp take, what I would do is just simply, hover over, and you could generally just kind of eyeball it, but always use your ears, and you'll see kind of the center, the little center point in each of the different areas here. So as soon as I hover here, we'll see this little anchor point in the top center. And then you could just adjust the volume, by listening to it ideally. But a lot of times you could just kind of eyeball it with different visual representations so that's how I would kind of treat multiple recordings, kind of lanes, I think is the best way. And if we have in the next question, what is the housekeeping function to consolidate all audio parts events when finished recording so that each track looks like one continuous track that looks easier on the eye than several broken tracks? So let's say if I have, something like this, and I now wanted to consolidate these different parts so that it doesn't look like there's 1,400 edits. What I would do is just select the events, go to audio, and just choose bounce selection. And then as soon as we go to your bounce selection, just hit replace. And then you have one audio file that will kind of, incorporate all of the different spaces. So that is kind of one contiguous audio file. So try going to audio. You have to select the files first, go to audio to bounce selection, and then you should be good. Okay. Okay, so question, with a very dynamic electric bass track, thickened by exporting audio to MIDI to blend in a Moog, can you use the envelope shaper sidechain to the volume of the bass track to match dynamics? Generally, like when you're doing that, when you do an audio to MIDI export, make sure, you can retain the original dynamics if you wanted to. So you could come right over here, and when we go to the very audio, so make sure that when you do an extract MIDI, that you could actually just kind of keep the volume curve, but you could have a fixed dynamics or dynamic velocity. So make sure that you have the dynamic velocity. Let's take a look at the envelope shaper and see, if you want it to match exactly the envelope shaper. Let's see if that has sidechaining on it. I just want to make sure. Okay, so you could sidechain the original bass with and send it to like the MIDI bass part that's triggering the mode and do sidechaining, but it may not carry over exactly what you want. But I would think that if you wanted it to be more accurate, do it within. You could use this as kind of like an after, as an after fix, but I would try to have the program actually, try to carry the dynamics over when you do the audio to MIDI extraction. I think that would be a better way to go. Okay. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg. Thank you so much for your help. You're very kind. You're welcome. Glad it's helpful for people. So question, how can I get rid of the audio dropouts when changing input signal channel or inserting effects during playback mode? So currently, how it's set up. Like when there isn't a way to kind of get rid of it. But what you, and I'll kind of explain and we'll show this just so you see it. So if we come here and let me just bring this down, and let's say if I wanted to throw a plug-in on my vocal here. So say if I just want to throw in like a compressor here, you'll get like that little bit of a gap. And why we have that is because, you know, it's, as we do that, it's, you know, figuring out the latency so that it's compensated for as soon as it plays back. So some programs will allow you to do that, and while it does it, the plugin is playing out of time until you stop, and it's not compensated for. So that's why you will hear that little bit of a gap. I know that I've seen on surveys, like some of the user surveys, that, you know, requests for a gapless audio engine was one of the, you know, questions that was asked on one of the surveys recently. And a lot of that, you know, input from user surveys, you know, is a strong genesis of new features. So if you see the different user surveys and you want features, that's a very easy way for the product planning to collect different data. So currently there isn't a way of doing that, but the request has been sent in a number of times where it's shown up on the survey. So maybe in the future. Okay, so we see Millard Brown checking in, wishing us a happy last day of June. So we're doing well here. Thanks for the sentiment, Millard. Okay. Okay, so we have a question from Taylor. What is the purpose of GPK files created for Wavelab? Are they important to keep after Wavelab is closed? What the GPK file is, a lot of times when you're dealing with digital audio files, you know, you may notice what the GPK file is the image of the waveform. So a lot of times you have the audio file, and each audio file will have almost like an image of the waveform file. And in Wavelab, that image file is a GPK file. And you might as well keep it, because otherwise, every time that you open up that audio file in Wavelab afterwards, it would just have to redraw that WAV file. And it does it quickly, but they usually take a very small amount of space. So it's not like, you know, it could be like, you know, 20 or 30 kilobytes for a WAV file just for the images. You know, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's minimal in comparison to the actual size of the WAV file. But that's what the GPK file is. It's just the waveform image file. So if you open that file in Wavelab afterwards, it would just have to kind of recreate that image for you. So that's all it is. So it's not super critical, but it could be a little bit annoying and take a little longer if you open that file later in Wavelab. Okay, so we see, hello, Greg, Jay from New Haven, Connecticut. How can we synthesize strumming guitars in Ondo and Cubase? You know, there's a couple of different ways. One of the tools that you could actually use, just create this really quickly here. I'll do a new project. You know, if you're doing acoustic guitars, you know, one approach could be to get a acoustic guitar instrument. So, for instance, if we have Halligan Sonic SE, we could load up an instrument, one that works on Halligan that's sold on the Steinberg online shop. It's not necessarily a Steinberg product. I believe it's done by Acoustic Instruments, but it's really pretty wonderful. It is called T-Guitar, and this is basically a sampled Taylor guitar. So if we wanted to play, you could kind of just trigger. You could play a chord. Let me move my tablet here. So I could just play a chord and have And you could also load up different players at this point. So you could say, okay, I want to do patterns. And at this point, you could pick different patterns per key if you wanted to. So if you said, okay, on this, I wanted to so say I want to do kind of like folk guitar stuff. I could play a chord here and it would just kind of play back. And each key could trigger a different pattern. So I play a guitar chord. So notice when I go to a D minor, that's going to be voiced higher, even though I'm playing a chord lower on the keyboard. Then I go to an E minor. It's going to voice the chord correctly. So each key could have its own independent, players. So if you just kind of click here, so if you wanted blues, funk, so that's probably the most realistic way. I know some people will take, a chord part. So let's say if you have chords here, like in the MIDI editor, let's just move this. You could use kind of the line tool, and I'll just make this larger. So as we look at it here, so if we just kind of grab this tool, you could. Or this tool, the trim tool, you could do kind of different voicing stuff like that to do different strumming techniques. So I think you hold down the Alt key, you could just kind of do different strumming. Some people, if you wanted to go down, you could just say, okay, I wanted to just have that strummed like so to kind of do different variations. Some people will load up different arpeggiators as well. Some people will have used the chord pads, and you could drop in different MIDI parts to arpeggiate on chord pads. So those are a couple different techniques to get more realistic guitars. Okay, so question, is it just my imagination, or does Cubase 10.5 have a faster response time than 9.5? Each version is also, and we saw in version 10, there's a lot of optimizations. Every version, as they add more features, they also kind of offset the burden of those features by optimizing. And there's some significant like audio engine optimizations, especially for beyond 14 cores of processing. That we saw in version 10. So you probably will notice perhaps a difference in the performance. So, all right. So we see Ambient Dave in the Hangout. So it's good to see him. Okay. So just, all right, so we have Ghana people. All right, so it's going through all the introductions still. All right, so we see, how does MIDI compression work in regards to velocities? I think we covered this on the previous Hangout, but for the benefit of everyone, we'll show it again. So as we wanted to come here, let's say if we have a drum pattern, let me activate this. All right, I'll just slow this down so it makes a little more sense. Sorry. All right. So let's say, a lot of times when you have different kits, especially on drums, and if we wanted to look at this, we could go through different plugins. So if I wanted to compress the velocities, one of the MIDI plugins that we could access is just under MIDI insert called compressor. All right, I'll open up the right one now. So at this point, if I want to take the velocities and be able to kind of compress their playback, and we could set, if I wanted the velocities to kind of be compressed more, and we could set up like, you know, different ratios. So if I wanted to be more dynamic, where it could be like, you know, the velocity, like more of an expansion. And if I put on 2:1, this way the velocity range would just kind of be more compressed. So you can kind of hear some of the effects of the MIDI velocity that you could do here. So without any compression on the velocity. So even if it's pretty sterile, I could just kind of compress and kind of keep the velocity. So it would affect the dynamics of the part by altering the velocities in real time. And that's how kind of the compressor MIDI plugin interacts with different velocities. Okay, so let's go ahead through some more questions. Okay, so I see, hi Greg, could you demonstrate how you would approach getting rid of a click probably caused by a bad edit in spectral layers? You may not need spectral layers for that. So let's say if I had an audio file here, let me just jump back to my loops. I'll show you a trick that you could often use just without having to, you know, spectral layers is great for that type of stuff. But if you want to see it kind of in Cubase, I'll show you. So let's say if we did just a horrible edit that resulted in a click or a pop. So let's just say, and let me just make sure I have zero crossing turned off. All right, so let's see if I can get this to do a pop here. And okay, so let's say if I just wanted to, we could hear that click right there in the timeline. So right there where it gets louder, we hear that click. So I will select both of these and I'll make a new audio event just by going to the bounce selection. So when you play this back, we're going to hear the click kind of right at measure 2. So if we wanted to get rid of that, we could just double click and go directly into the sample editor. So, and right here where we kind of see that pop and click, if you kind of zoom in to near the sample level, at this point you'll get a drawing tool, and then you could just kind of smooth that in for both of those to kind of get rid of that pop or click. And I think if you hold down shift, you can do that to both of them at the same time. So now when you want to come here, I probably just did a horrible edit as well. So let's say, but you know, just kind of zoom in here. And if you wanted to approach it with spectral layers, let's come over here. And I'll just get to my audio to extensions. And we'll choose spectral layers. Then that's going to launch. And as we see the spectral layers here, at this point, I will just grab my eraser and just kind of erase the click. And let's go ahead and play it now. So you could just kind of minimize it like that. So that's a couple different approaches of getting rid of clicks caused by bad edits. Okay, let's move on. All right, so we have people from Sweden checking in again, regular attendees. Okay, so we have a question. I've been using the event editor in Anger. It is great. Would be great to have undo and redo buttons on that window, or else be able to make that window be on top, maybe. So let's see, the event editor. So I'm not sure if it's... maybe I'm just kind of, maybe if you could specify what the event editor is. I'm not sure if it's in the, if it's a MIDI, if the event editor is referring to the list editor. But if you're talking about the list editor and you've made changes here, these within the editor, that's a unlimited level of undos as well. So I don't think it's the editor's work is always on top, but you could still have the same levels of undo directly within the within the list editor. But if it's a different event editor, just let me know and maybe I could answer better, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. Okay, going through different comments. We're still going through introductions. All right, so question, can you reorder inserts and have automation move as well? So let's say if I come here and I want to take my saxophone part, I'll just erase this for now. All right, so I wanted to let's put on a couple of inserts. Okay, and let's put on just a little bit of dynamics. Okay, so I will play this particular part. Let me just put it into a loop. All right. All right, I'll just turn that off for now. This I'll put on an 1/8 note delay. And let me automate the my compressor here. Okay, so we have automation, and let's see if I could just switch the plugin. So now the compressor is on top. So I think the automation is tied to the particular insert. So let's just come here. So I think it's going to be tied to the insert number, but you could just select the automation and copy it and then select the correct parameter. So let's say if I wanted to go to more and I wanted to go to, see when we come over here to the inserts, so at this point I could just set my threshold. So you can see it's going to be ordered by the insert number. And then so I could copy or cut that and then just paste the automation directly into that and go along with that. But it's going to be how the automation sees it is by the insert number as well. Okay, so Greg, explain what does it mean, edit, solo, record in MIDI editors, follow, focus, and preferences, editing. So if we have a MIDI track here, so let me just... so let's go to the preference. Let's see if I can find a preference here. I'm not sure if it's under record or maybe under editing. But I think with that preference, let me just see if I could... Okay, so preferences, and then so I think it's supposed to be... Okay, so edit, right at the very top, edit, solo, record in MIDI editors, follows, focus. So right now, if I wanted to just record... and if I'm here... So if I wanted to record directly in this particular editor, I can now just record. And then you may not see the actual MIDI events occur until I hit stop. So as I'm recording at this point. So, and what you could have is, if this area is in focus, you could have that automatically record, be record enabled. So this allows you to kind of automatically to record in the editor as soon as it has the focus. So it was kind of an independent setting that was, I think, introduced when the lower zone MIDI editor came in. So that preference allows you basically to automatically, whatever's in focus, to automatically show you the MIDI data as it's being recording without having to manually do it here in the editor. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Can you explain the use of MIDI dissolve part function in setting up Groove Agent to record multiple tracks? Is there a preference when to use one over the other? We could think of the... So if I have a Groove Agent part here, I'll just revert this quickly. So we look at this and I have a MIDI part. All right, so let me just... So, this is, we see that we're going to have like, kick, snare, and hi-hat in this particular part here. So as we look at this... And I'll just make this a little taller here. So, all right. So I see kick, snare, and hi-hat. So, but this doesn't really have any correlation to the audio outputs. But what a lot of people like to do is to take their kick and have it on its own separate MIDI track, the snare on its own separate MIDI track, the hi-hat, toms, whatever, on their own separate tracks. And that's when we would go to MIDI and choose to dissolve part. So what this will do is this will split the MIDI data. So I'm going to just come right over here. So we go to MIDI and dissolve part, and we choose to separate pitches. And now it will have a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat all onto its own track. So it doesn't really affect the actual audio routing in the instrument. It's just splitting each of the MIDI events to different independent tracks. So if you had it kind of, being where the kick was going out of one output, one audio output, the snare out of a separate audio output, or the hi-hat out of a different unique audio output, when they're all consolidated into one part, that would be the same as when kind of splitting it. So this is the dissolved MIDI is really just going to be for visually splitting out the MIDI data to its own unique independent, where each part will have its own track. So it doesn't really tie into the audio splitting and for summing or taking out to different outputs for mixing. Okay. Okay. Hi, Greg. Thanks for awesome answers. My question is, can we change the color of the ruler track, and not the track itself, but the ruler line itself? So let's take a look. So let's add a couple ruler tracks here. Okay, so it looks like we could change the track, but that might be kind of staying the same for our ruler track. So I don't know why. Let me just take a look in. Sometimes there might be a preference. So I will come over here. Let's look at. So let's see. Okay. So we have a different kind of track. So I don't know of a way to change that independently. But yeah, I think we could change like the track here, but I think this is going to be the same. So if I just change that track, that color doesn't automatically carry over. But I could pass that on as kind of a feature request, or I can see where that would be a nice addition. Okay, just navigating on my timeline here. Just bear with me. Okay. Hey there, my musical brothers and sisters. Remember, okay, so just the comment saying people to hit the like button. That's always helpful. I won't disagree with that. So I see Greg, just curious, what headphones are you using for referencing? Today's room studios aren't quite in line with the bass regions. Are the ones you use flat or not? And what would you recommend? Let me just take a look. I have a headphone collection because I was the guy who would always be on a plane and leave my headphones at home, and then I would just buy headphones in a music store to get through a trip. But I'm currently using some of the Yamaha. Let me see if the model numbers on the headphones. I want to say it's like the HPH MT8. Let me see if I could just Google it on my other computer quickly. Yes, I think it's the HPH MT8, and that's what I use for all of my Hangouts, and I found that they've worked surprisingly well. I had some other, previous Yamaha headphones that maybe I wasn't the biggest fan of, but I like the HPH MT8 quite a lot. I know, headphones can be very personal. And I know we kind of did these as for like a user event, and we did a giveaway, and a bunch of people. We got lots of very people that, live and die doing vocal sessions, like, wow, I just love these headphones. So, check those out. And I have, my AKG 240s, I have Audio Technicas, I have Shures, I have lots of Sonys, and I found that these translate pretty well for mixing. They're comfortable to wear. So, I've had some times where I've worn them for 8 hours and it didn't really feel like I had headphones on for the whole time. And I found that they've translated very well. So, check those out. So that's the headphones I'm using and what I kind of keep plugged in. Okay, so just seeing question how to spot a file in selected range. Let me just switch to... So I'm not sure if you're trying to do spot recording or spot editing in a range. So maybe if you could specify... So, when a file is within a range, you'll see kind of the colors change here, but I think I might be misunderstanding you. So I'm not sure if you're doing like a spotting session or if you're wanting to indicate visually the difference in range. So maybe if you could specify that again and give me a little more info, that would be great. Okay, so we have a question. I'd really love to know how to work with different types of saturation and what saturation and what saturators are for. So a lot of times there's certain, projects where people have grown up, listening to analog tape and they still kind of have, they kind of like the sound of analog tape. And I find that a lot of people that love the mythical sound of analog tape didn't actually work with it in studios a lot. Where you had to align the tape machine every hour and a half and, be the person that had to do that. So, but we'll show you some of the different saturations here just so you get a sense. I'll just revert this quickly. So, a lot of people may use a plugin like Magneto on the analog output or on particular tracks. So, let's come here and we'll just play back this track and we'll run like the whole mix through saturation. I turn it up, you wouldn't mind. So you could run it from the channel strip or, so if you're here, there's tape saturation, tube saturation, and maybe Magneto. So Magneto is the first plugin that actually did, physical modeling of analog tape machines. So if you wanted to come over here and you'd find it under distortion. So you just kind of see your Magneto 2. So if you wanted to kind of add more saturation. So you can hear a little bit of distortion, but in a pleasing way. And if you want it to sound like it's going through the machine twice, you put it in dual mode. To choose what's mine and what's yours. And if you want to solo, what's going on? Now you're asking Beatles or songs. Something about that just sounds so wrong. But it's too late to start a fight. Take the lead, let it light. Please stop asking Beatles or Stones. Just leave it alone. And let's say if I wanted to switch to, I think we go to tape. Or if you wanted to go to the tube. And this may be one that you may run on an individual track. So maybe if I wanted to have the vocal sound like, maybe going through like a tube mic, you could come over here. So I'll come to the saturation here, and we'll just put it in a tube. Whatever you did, that was okay. Out into now, that was okay. So if you want some more distortion like that, you could do that. And a lot of times, tape saturations A little bit can go a long way. I'm just kind of going extreme sound so you could kind of hear the differences. But, you know, these could be used very subtly. So it's just tape on the vocal.
Something about that just sounds so wrong.
You can bypass that.
What I say to start a fight is take the records that you like. Please stop asking Beatles or Stones.
So it'll give you an idea, but you know, use them sparingly. But it's often just to add a different flavor. So to give you kind of the warmth that sometimes people kind of crave and feel is missing in recordings. Okay. Question: is there a way to double click and load the instrument or effects from the media bay? So if you are right over here, so let's say if you wanted to, so if you're just doing the plugin itself, so let's say if I have this selected, so double clicking will load generally like the, so let me just come over here. Say if I go to a delay plugin, I go to my mono delay. I have this channel selected. So, and let's see if I just double click on the preset. So double clicking can get you to the actual presets. And at this point, you could just drag it. So where you see a green, if I drag it like that, it's going to be an insert. And if I drag it between tracks, it could be just placed as like an effects channel. So, so once you're here, you could get to the different presets, and let's see if it's the same. It might be slightly different for a virtual instrument. So let me just, I think of VST instrument. I could come over here. So let's say we would go to Retrolog, and I wanted to go to this batch of presets. Let me kill the filter. And then you could just double click and that will load up the instruments. I think that the effects plugins will work a little differently, but I'll just try it one more time just to make sure. But you could double click on the instrument to go to the presets, double click on the instrument, and that will load up. So let's come over here and just say, let's go to like pitch shifter plugin and double click. So the VST instruments, you could double click on the presets or double click on the instrument, double click on the presets, but you could always, you know, from the media bay, just kind of easily drag and drop as well. Okay, so we have a question. Render in place does not seem to take into account MIDI sends when they are routed to another instrument or MIDI track that's different to the main MIDI output. Is there a way to include them? So the you would have to, you know, so I think when you do MIDI sends here, you know, since that's a different audio path, that you would have to, you know, you would have to render those separately. So when we do a render in place for a virtual instrument here, such as this, that's basically taking the audio output of this particular track and rendering that. And it's not going to take into account different scenarios for other audio paths, such as the MIDI send. So you'd have to render those separately. What some people will do is send them to a group and just do an export audio mix down. And then you could just render your group, render your group channels and have that carried over. But I can see, you know, generally the render in place is going to follow the signal path of the primary sound source and not include the MIDI sends. But I could pass that along as maybe a potential future addition. Okay, so just saying a couple comments on APO equalizer. So, and then rewind with APO equalizer. So I'm not sure what the APO equalizer is, or if there's a question with that. So maybe if you could, if there's a question, just maybe asking a question. All right. It says, Hola, can my Cubase 10 license on my desktop and also use on my laptop? If you have a USB-E licenser, so that would be where you could run, you could run all the Cubase versions on it. And if it's the USB-E licenser that contains a license, you could run that on any computer. So you could freely take it from, laptop to desktop, Mac or PC, doesn't matter. If it's going to be a soft E licenser, you'll have one soft E license. And then that can't be necessarily, that license as a soft E license can't be moved easily, but you could, if you purchased a USB E licenser, transfer the soft E license to the USB E licenser, and then just connect the dongle, the USB E licenser, to the computer that you want to run Cubase on. Okay, so it says question. I have a project at 122 beats per minute with several tracks. I want to import a track that was accidentally recorded at 120. What is the best way to bring in this other track and have it match? So make sure. I'll just get to a project where this can make a little more sense. Okay, so let's say if we have a bass track that was recorded at a different tempo. So if you have the audio file, you want to go into your pool window under your media, and then you'll probably see that all the files will have a tempo stamp. So as a file is recorded into Cubase, it's going to be tempo stamped. And what you want to do, if the rest of them are 120 and one is 122 BPM, is just make sure that, the one that's 122, just simply make sure that you'll see the tempo indication here in the pool. Make sure it's set to 122 and place it into musical mode. And then once it's in musical mode, whatever tempo you have, the audio will speed up and slow down to match the tempo. So if I wanted to even take just a drum loop, for instance, let's do something highly inappropriate. All right, so let's say I wanted to drag this drum loop in. I'm just going to place it here. So we now have this particular drum loop. I'm going to just start the loop on, let's say, a downbeat. All right, so generally when I listen to it, and if I was playing back at different tempos, you may have a lovely sound like this. And even if it's close, it's going to slowly kind of get out of time. That's probably a little too close to the original tempo. Let me find something else. All right, so that should probably be different. So really all you do is select that file and we want to place it into musical mode. And now as we play this back, it's going to automatically speed up and slow down. Even though it's a horrible beat for it, but what you do is just place it into musical mode, and then all those tracks will just speed up and slow down to match the master tempo. So take the track that's 122 beats per minute in the pool window, and make sure that you see 122, place it into musical mode, and then it's going to follow the rest of the tracks if they're following the tempo. All right, hang on, my son's knocking on the door. Bear with me just a second. All right, sorry about that. All right, so we have a new movie on, so we should have another hour and a half or 2 hours. So, okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to permanently render effects from an insert onto an audio track, as I believe freezing track is temporary and doesn't actually render to the main audio file? So freezing will create a separate audio file that has that. So that will be rendered to the file. You know, there's a number of different ways. So if you want to come here and just select a particular audio file, you know, if I wanted to, let's say I'll take just a little bit of the bass and just kind of make this larger here, and I'll put it on our play. So if I wanted to, you know, select just a range here and render the file, we could go to your audio to direct offline processing. You could do this using F7. And at this point, you will see plugins or processes. So at this point, I will just say I want to go through like the VST amp rack or the VST bass amp. And now as I come over here, that's going to be just automatically processed on that particular clip. So let's say I'll just take the bass. So say I wanted to adjust the EQ here. That will re-render that particular file. And then when it gets to the end of the file, then as we play on there, then it's going to not be processed. So that's permanently creating a new audio file. And the beauty of this, even though, you know, it is creating a new audio file, the original file is always intact. So you could just right click and just choose to delete files. Another way of kind of accomplishing the same thing is just to take, and if you wanted to, if you had inserts on a particular track, so let's say if I have inserts on my bass track and I wanted to run it through, you know, compressor or whatever I wanted to. So let's say I'll go to my dynamics and let's just run a compressor on my bass. You know, if I have that particular file selected, I could also just come right over here. And if I have a number of, let's say I'll go through the VST bass amp again. So if I have a number of different effects as inserts, and I had these all multiply set up, and I had, you know, 16 inserts going on in this particular track. So if I hit F7 and I have that particular file selected and hit F7, at this point, I could drag the inserts directly to my offline processing, and it's going to process the whole track for you. So now as we play back, that's been rendered as a separate file. Again, the original file is intact. And if I wanted to go back to the original file, even after saving, I could just choose to delete all, and then all my processes will be rendered. But a freeze, it will write a file and keep the original file. So it is a permanent thing as well. So a couple of different approaches. Okay, so it says, how do you set up a sidechain from one track to another to affect another for multiband compressor? All right, so let me just pop over here and I'll take a look at it. I think I have kind of a sidechain project set up here. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, so let's say if I have something that I want sidechained like this, like a kick and snare. So I'll come over here to my synth, and I currently have this just as a normal compressor, but I'll put on a multi-band compressor. So what I'm going to do now is just to click here to activate the sidechain, and then I'm going to click on the little icon just directly to the right, and we'll say add our sidechain input, and let's say I want this kick. And now as we do this, so without the sidechain. So as we do that, and now we activate the plugin with the sidechain. So it's really just once you have that multi-band compressor, at this point, activate sidechaining, and just to the right of that, you can add the sidechain input. And you can use multiple destinations. So if you want to kick and snare, you could have that set up for sidechaining for your multi-band compressor. All right, so see a question. Is there a way to change playback rate to 1/2? Not just tempo, but changing playback sample rate temporarily to hear everything at half speed, octave down. Useful to analyze bass rumbling. Yeah, so if you want to do that, we'll just jump back to this project here. And there's a function that could be accessed. I think it might be under transport. Let's see if it's available in the menus here. Okay, so if I know it's under key commands. And then there's under transport, you'll see shuttle play. So scroll down over here to shuttle play, and you can say 1/2 times. Let's see if I may have all right, so, and you could set a key command for this. So let's say while it's playing back, I'm just gonna, I think it's command control. I just made this key command in a previous Hangout, option number 2. All right, so at this point, so I set up a key command for shuttle play 1/2 times. So at this point, while we're playing, and let me just revert this quickly so I don't have all sorts of horrible processing I've killed the song with. All right, so, and if I want this to play like a shuttle speed at halftime, I'll just trigger that key command. And then I let go. And we're back at normal speed. So if you wanted to look for rumbles, potentially in the project, let go.
Now you're packing boxes ready to
Let go, and you're back at normal speed.
on the floor.
So once again, go to your key commands. And under transport, you'll see shuttle play. You could do 1/4, 1/2, 1/8, or 2, 4, 8, whatever you wanted to do. So set up a key command for that, and then you could listen to it at half speed, at half, including half pitch, and at that point, you could kind of pick out rumbles quickly. Okay, so see a question. Hi, Greg. I'm having problems to proper sync my modular with Cubase. It's not 100% on the grid. Just for latency is on, and my buffer size is super low. Also already configured the project sync setup. I've seen a number of modular synths that don't properly sync well. I would try to, just out of curiosity, if you have your different, I'm not sure if you're doing MIDI clock or MIDI time code. I assume it's going to be MIDI clock. Sometimes I've known people that will that use different MIDI interfaces, and some will translate, will handle MIDI clock synchronization better. Sometimes the devices themselves don't synchronize really well. I just had to do a bunch of drum machine transfers from like an Alesis HR16. It's probably 30 years old. and I didn't have any problems with MIDI sync with that. And sometimes, and make sure also that, if you're triggering different elements, I know sometimes people may, have a note message that gets sent out and is syncing externally, so make sure that is, on the grid as you do different MIDI edits, but you may have to check out maybe using a different MIDI interface. Sometimes some of the USB interfaces, may not handle as well, but you may, if you have a different MIDI interface to try to see if that makes a difference for syncing for your modular stuff. But, generally I haven't really found a situation where the Cubase sync is the issue. They usually pay, particular attention to detail on that. Like I know in the old days when people would sync to tape, that was like the most critical thing, was how fast and how accurate Cubase locked to incoming time code. So try, if you have the option to try a different MIDI communication device, I would try that and see if it makes a difference. Okay, so it says, hi, my question is how to route effects track in mixer channel. Any trick or tips? So once you have, so right now, if I come here,
I've got to choose.
And I go to my inserts here, I have a reverence reverb on my lead vocal. So when we do this, if I wanted to navigate to my, so as you add an effects channel track here, so let's say if you add an effects channel track, I could come right over here. And since this is going, I could go to my routing tab. I could say, let's just go directly to, I see it's being sent to 2 targets. So now I could just come right over here. And this is my effects return channel for the reverb. So I could come over here and EQ just a reverb. So this way, this is my effects return channel, and we see it indicated by this color fader. So just want to, is how to route an effects channel to mixer channel. So, your effects channel is already routed to mixer channel. And if I wanted to send another device to that particular channel, I could take like my guitar part here and I would go to my sends. And at this point, I could send more guitar to that same effects channel. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding what you want to do, but that's how you can have your effects track, and it's routed into a mixer channel. You could send other tracks to it. You could send your effects channel, if I want to come select my effects channel here, and if I wanted to send that to a group, you could route this audio signal, basically to any destination. So, but if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. Okay, so question, should I use the mixer on the audio interface going in recording and then the mixer in Cubase to tweak and vice versa? Sorry if it's already missed the answer to this. A lot of times, the only time that I would probably use the audio interface on my mixer is, or on the mixer on my audio interface rather, is if that audio interface had particular DSP that was beneficial on tracking. So like the Steinberg UR series, like if you wanted to record with compression on the way in before the signal is actually recorded, that's a benefit. So you don't necessarily have to have outboard compression, and it does that using the built-in DSP of the UR interfaces as well. So you could print through the morphing channel strip, to apply compression EQ. So you don't need to have kind of like a safety compressor or EQ on the way in as hardware. But other than that, and you may use it for routing internally, but I would, unless it had specific DSP capabilities that were only unique to the input stage, I would do everything in the Cubase mixer, because that way it's automated. You could recall the project. So if you're in the middle of a project, you just open up the project and all those settings will be intact. So I would say for the majority of audio interfaces that don't have kind of unique and practical integration of onboard DSP for tracking, that I would just use the Cubase mixer. Okay, so I see I played a MIDI lead. How can I transpose the entire lead higher or lower? So let's say I just have a MIDI part here in my project window, and I will take this, and I could just select all of the notes and just use my up and down keys. You could also just, whatever notes you have selected, you could just take your pitch and come right over here with your mouse scroll wheel. And sometimes it's hard to see when it is selected, but I could just select the pitch, come here to my mouse scroll wheel. So whatever is selected. You could also just, say I wanted to take all these events, go to MIDI to transpose. And you can go to transpose setup and say, I want to take all these notes up an octave. So at this point, just say I want to transpose it up 12. And that way, everything just did. So, transposing your MIDI is easy, but the easiest way is just select the notes and just use your up and down arrow keys, or use the info line. And then, it's very easy to transpose your MIDI. Okay, so I see some more discussion about the tempo being 120 and 122. So you see... so I just see, what if I wasn't sure exactly what the track's tempo was, and I was guessing it was 120 beats a minute instead of my project's 122. I tried setting the musical mode in the pool, entering 120. What you could do if you're in a scenario where you're not sure what the original tempo is you could just do a tempo detection. So let's say if you recorded a band and they're fluctuating in speed, and you can do this for a multi-track in the same exact way. So if I wanted to come here and my metronome isn't aligned with the audio, I will select the audio, go to my project, and then I will go to tempo detection. And as we do this, it's created a tempo map for us. Let's see if it's... All right, so I'm going to do it one more time because I was too ambitious. So I'll do my tempo detection. Just takes a second here. So as I do my tempo detection, I'm going to listen to it. And sometimes I may have to do like an offbeat correction. So now it's extracted what the tempo is. And we can see that the tempo is going to be fluctuating every beat, basically. So if we kind of blow this up. And now what I want to do is I'm going to find just a downbeat. So right there's a downbeat. And it does this, figures it out by beat. And we'll say this is our 4/4 bar. So now if I wanted to take a loop that was at a different tempo, so say I want to take this loop, and again, this will be a different tempo. I'm going to drag this in. I'm going to just start this on a grid and place this into musical mode from the info line. Then so now this drum loop is following the timing. Of the original track. Now, if I wanted this track, the original track, to play back at a steady tempo, what I could do is just select the file, go to your audio menu, and go to advanced, and we'll say set definition from tempo. And what this will do is embed the tempo changes of each beat in the audio file in the file itself. So if I wanted to just make this a perfect, instead of fluctuating every 2 beats, I want it to be, let's say, 144 beats a minute steady without any fluctuation. Or if I want to make it 156. So now, even though the original track was speeding up and fluctuating and slowing down, I can make it steady. So if you don't know what the original tempo is, take one of the files like a kick, an overhead, or a beat, something rhythmic helps, and do a tempo detection. And then once you do the tempo detection, the other parts, once you know kind of what the tempo is, and you could do a tempo detection of each of those parts, and then place it into musical mode. And even if the different parts were at different tempos based on your tempo detection, it will, once you've done the audio advanced and do the set definition from tempo, each of those parts will automatically conform to the tempo track in the project. Okay, so I just see a question. What is Greg's email? So for the Hangouts, you can always send questions or comments or to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So clubcubase@steinberg.de. I see someone else had mentioned that. All right. So, but for the benefit of people just listening. Okay. When I use audio pitch correct my vocals, how can I review the audio samples that I clicked on? Okay. So, so if you wanted to hear the samples, so let's jump back to this project. So if I'm doing like Very Audio, I'll just kind of come over here. We'll activate the Very Audio. And as I select notes, you can kind of come directly over here. Make sure that you have the acoustic feedback on. And then as you make changes to your pitch, you could just have that automatically. You could hear those changes as you make it. So if that's kind of what you mean by to review the audio samples clicked on, so make sure, and you may have to be going through the control room. So if you're doing this within Very Audio, make sure that you have the control room active. You could have the outputs defined, but routed to not connected. And then at that point within like the Very Audio editor, make sure that you have this particular icon, the acoustic feedback. And then once you have that, then and then you'll be able to kind of hear those changes instantly. But if I misunderstood, just let me know. Okay, so we have a question. Please explain the comp tool a bit broadly. Okay. Okay, so when we want to compile or create a composite of different recordings, this is where the comp tool comes in very handy. So let me just revert this project. Okay, so on this particular recording, let's say from here, I'll just go check my preference here real quick. Okay, so let's say if I've done like multiple recordings on a particular track and I just did this in a cycle, you could record audio on top of audio on top of audio on top of audio. And to view each of those different takes, you could activate the show lanes icon. Now, the tool that benefits from this is when we go to our comp tool, which looks like a hand. So if I wanted to switch, and then I could select between different takes or performances. Now, in previous versions, you would have to then grab a scissors tool, cut, mute the other part, solo, and do all that. And that could be a bit laborious and constantly switching tools. So the comp tool allows us to select particular ranges, and I could audition these if I hold down Control or Command with the comp tool. I could audition different takes and say, oh, I like that one instead. I want this. I want that from that take. Let's do that take there. And let's say this is now our perfect performance, whether it's a guitar solo, vocals, a bass part, drums, or whatever. And now at this point, I could just click here, and then that would show us all the parts in one single lane that would make up our comp tool. So the comp tool is just a very easy way of being able to edit and select different takes recorded on the same track. Okay, let's go on. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned something new, please feel free to click the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Okay. Okay, question: is everything from the SE versions of Hallian Sonic and Groove Agent available in the full versions? Example, is there any point in having both versions activated in the plugin manager? Everything that you have in the SE versions is in the bigger versions. So it's not really going to hurt to have both of them active. And sometimes if you exchange projects with people and they don't have the full version of, Hallian Sonic SE, if they don't have the full, and let's say they had, they did something in Hallian Sonic SE, they sent you over a file, or did something in Groove Agent SE, having those plugins open would give you kind of broader compatibility, but all the functionality is from the LE versions of Hallian Sonic and Groove Agent is in the big brothers. But if you work with other people in kind of a collaborative environment and they just want to send you over like a MIDI part or a Cubase project, that way it's going to load because everyone has kind of a base set of tools. So you may want to keep it, but you could maybe, not use it. But, depending on your workflow, if you work with other people, it can make sense to perhaps keep those installed and active. Okay. Okay, just reading through some different comments. Okay, so see, question: how to make the lead vocal trigger the master bus compressor in a TV mix, mix without a lead vocal. So let's say if you have it's a TV mix. So let's say if I wanted to come here. Okay, jump back to this project that has vocal in it. Okay, so let's say I wanted the vocal to still feed the compressor. So we're doing like a no. All right, so let's come over here. And I'll just set up a quick compressor. Let's try something outrageously inappropriate so it's audible. So let's say if I have this set up. Okay, so now the vocals, we have a big compressor on the master mix. And let's say if we want that compressor to be triggered by our vocal, so I will come over here. Let's activate the sidechain and say we want it from our lead vocal.
You were mine up until now. That was okay. Guess all along.
All right, and let me just. Okay, so I'll just send this out. So let's say we'll do. So now every time the lead vocal comes in, the whole mix. Yeah, but let's say if I route this to. And let's take my lead vocal. And let's see what happens if I route this to. All right, so right now, I set the lead vocal here to no bus. So the lead vocal isn't going out of the bus. And at this point, when the vocal is not in, we still have the compression going. So it's compressed. So you can hear it kind of pumping. So as soon as the vocal stops, so all you have to do is on the main output, just choose no bus, and then the vocal is still feeding the compressor via the send here. And if you wanted to mute the reverb return, you could do that as well for the TV mix, but that's all you'd have to do is on the main output for the lead vocal, set it to no bus. Okay, so I see a question, how to use Cubase as a live stream mixing console. You could definitely do that, but it's going to be very contingent. It's going to depend a lot on your audio interface itself. Some will allow you to do that quite easily, but if you wanted to just take all of your different sources and feed it in, we have people doing this all the time. You could do a new project and you could have all of your inputs directly here. So if you go to your audio connections, and let's say if we had, 8 analog inputs. So let's say I have one stereo, and let's say if I want to add 6, So at this point, you could control the input stage. You could apply just clicking on E if you wanted to do EQs to do like a high pass filter. One thing to be concerned of is, you know, if you run it through like a big plugin, like a big multi-band compressor or a convolution reverb, it may be delayed just by the latency of that particular plugin. So just be aware of that. But you could just take your 8 inputs, your input channels here, and use that for a live stream mixer. But you would need to have an audio interface to feed those inputs ideally. Okay. So say, Greg, another question. Explain, please. Checkbox. Store marked preferences only in the preferences menu. After checking this, all changes are applying regardless of choice in store column. Thank you. So let's go back to. Let's check it out here. So let's go to preferences. All right, so let's say I have these two set, and let's say if I set this, and I'm going to click store marked preferences only. Okay, so I think if we're here, okay, let me just set this up. Okay. Okay, let me just set it up. So let's say if I go to MIDI here, and I have select controllers and note range, I go to audio and I have the first two checked. Okay, now let me just come back to the preferences and see if it's stored. So if we go to MIDI first, so it does look like it stores. I could do some more research on that and see, but I think, you know, that it seems to be storing all the two different preference areas that I did check. But let me just see if I do that again. And let me just see if I store these. Okay, so let's say if I go back to default preferences. Okay, and let me just go back to the preset that we made here. So it looks like if you have that checked and then save the preference presets, that it'll only save those particular ones. So it looks like you may have to store the preference presets as a new preference one, but that way you could do it and maybe only save those particular ones. So that seems what it's doing. Okay. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so good to see Alexander Brandon on a Hangout. Says, hi, Greg. Been a while. I hope you and your family are well. Amazed Hallian is still going strong after all these years. Yeah, I mean, Hallian is, the sales do great all the time on Hallian. So it's a wonderful tool for so much sound design and creating your own stuff, and really just kind of a Swiss Army knife of different sounds to use. Okay. Okay, so just see comment. Great job as usual, Greg. Oh, thanks. You're welcome. Hope people are learning something. It says, can I use my input output for external effects on the AXR4? The manual shows 2 and 12 respectively. So yeah, it would be really the same for any audio interface. So if we go to your VST connections, we could go directly to F4. And if you have Cubase Pro or Nuendo, you could go to your external effects. So here, let's say you have a DBX compressor. Basically, you need like the inputs and outputs where you have that hardware connected to your audio interface. So you say, okay, I'm going to connect it to this input and this output. If we add an audio track and go to an insert at this point, you would say you want to go to external plugins and say, okay, we connected our DBX. So as we do this, it would automatically send the signal out of our audio interface into our hardware, in this instance, our DBX compressor. And the output of the DBX compressor is being fed directly back to the input. And what we want to do is to come right over here and measure you could ping the system. And by clicking on that icon, that will send a signal through the entire signal chain. And at that point, just simply we'll do the latency compensation for any external processors that occur. Or any external latencies that could be introduced by the converters or the converters in units, if it's like a digital effect processor. But yeah, it's the same way, using it for an AXR or UR, 44, just basically any audio. You just want to have audio inputs and outputs in your audio interface, which you have a lot of in the AXR4, and use that as the basis to connect in and out of your external processors. Okay, so I see question, how do I set up my Cubase 10.5 on 2 computers? So if you have a USB-E licenser, as we discussed a little bit earlier, you could have your Cubase license, and if you're running Cubase Artist or Cubase Pro, that requires a USB-E licenser. But and then just if you have the license, and even if you have a lesser version like Cubase Elements, AI, or LE, at that point you could just take those particular soft E licenses and transfer it to a USB E licenser, and then you could install it on as many computers as you want, and just simply connect the USB E licenser in a computer that you wanted to run it on at that moment in time. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. When I record with microphone, is there a fast way or shortcut to mute monitor output and only have headphone output activated? When I finish record, I want monitor output to come back. I think what you could do is, if you wanted to, like as you do, recording, and you wanted to monitor the speaker, I think if you just go to the control room, and if you wanted to, you could just choose to, so let's say, let me just jump back to project with some audio here quickly. So if we go to the control room, once you have this done, like as you're tracking, you could just mute the control room,
I was so naive.
or just click on dim.
Now you're packing boxes.
And you could have this set to kind of like a known. You could also have this set to like a known monitoring level. So if you want to, come here, you could also just set a reference level. So let's say if I come here, I can set my reference level to -0 dB, hold down Alt or Option or Control or Command rather. And then as you do tracking, just click there. And you could also just have it, go directly into your headphones. So you could have a phones channel set up. So in your connections here. So if you're like tracking by yourself, I understand where that can make sense. So while you go to your control room, you could just have your phones channel set up independently as well. So those are a couple of options you could do to not have it go through your speakers. And those are keyboard shortcuts that are set for that. Okay, hello. Is there any way to quantize automation faders to an entire section? I'm using a Behringer X-Touch with no complete support. Please do something with it also. So, there's a couple of different ways you could approach it. One, let's say if we have a loop range, and at this point, I wanted to, let's say I hit F6 and we go into, my automation panel setup. Sorry, let me just hit every wrong F function key here. All right, so sorry about that. Just function key palooza. If you wanted to, you could set up, your loop automation. So let's say if I have automation here, and I think just going to reread it again. So is there any way to quantize automation faders to entire sections? So at this point, if I had automation enabled, I could come right over here. And then we could say fill loop. And so if I want it on that particular selection, all I'd have to do is go to, just go to my fader, and then whatever value I set and I let go, it would just set that value for the particular loop. So that's all. So that's all you'd have to do for a particular loop section. So if you just kind of come here and you wanted to write the automation, it could just do that for the loop or to the end. So anytime you wanted to just come here, you could also, just select the range of automation and just say, I want this louder, I want that softer. So there's a number of different options for, just having to quantize the automation snap. You could always take, a particular automation point here. And I think if you select the automation point, you could choose, exactly where, if you wanted that to be on specific points, you could just go to the info line and be able to move the automation point to particular ranges or to a particular section as well. Okay. Okay, just reading through different questions. Okay, so from Ambient Dave says, thanks Cubase, thanks Greg. I know you can do compression from the highlighted velocities. Greg, is that correct? So yeah, so if you wanted to do kind of compression on like a particular MIDI area, like within the editor. So say if I wanted to just double click here, And let me zoom in. At this point, I could just, if you go to whatever notes you have selected, I could just come here and just kind of compress or expand by going to the right center edge. And then you could expand or compress kind of the contents. And if you get to the upper center, you could bring them all down proportionally. So if I wanted to expand, you could do stuff like that as well. So let's say I wanted to expand all these and then kind of compress or expand the differences. You could go to this right center edge within the editor as well. So a couple tips there. Okay, just seeing people wanting to start a Patreon fund for Ambient Dave so he could live in a place that's more amenable for cooler temperatures. All right. Get to learn a lot about the climate of Spain and UK. So Canary Islands and Tenerife are popular. All right. Okay, so yeah, just see Gareth make a comment. So you can draw waveforms. Whoa, I missed that. So yeah, you could do that, but you have to be zoomed way in, like near the sample level. Okay, so let me see if this is going back to what we were discussing just a little while ago. Let me just scroll back. Okay, so just reading back this, but I think a further discussion on the quantizing automation. So another point, and you'll see if this makes sense. So think about mixing with a console, but I would like to automatically quantize the complete section. Is there a way to do it without using the mouse? So as soon as you have and as we showed, if you use the automation panel, and that's F6, you could just have it set for within the selected range of the loop. And then as soon as you move the fader, that's going to write that value directly to that loop. So I think that kind of does. So I think that'll work. So if you try that for, within the automation panel for the loop, I think that'll still work and make sense. Okay, just going through. Okay, so we see a question. Does a Beat Designer work on third-party plugins or just Steinberg? Is it purely for triggering MIDI, or can you drag samples into Beat Designer? What Beat Designer is really intended to be is, just kind of like a very simple. So I think I have. Is really a simple, it works with any plugin. It just transmits MIDI information. So I will come here to my Groove Agent and we'll go to MIDI inserts. So if I wanted to come here to Beat Designer, at this point, we could program, different. So let's, I'll just kind of migrate after the song here. But let's say if I wanted to, just put in different patterns, we could have its own kind of internal patterns that will be triggered. So this could be a beat that's going to be set up for, different sound sources. So what this is basically just a mini step sequencer. So this doesn't contain sounds, but this sends the MIDI information to a plugin like Groove Agent, and Groove Agent could trigger those sounds. And if you're using like a Beat Agent kit, you could drag and drop samples in there. So we could think of the Beat Designer that works with any plugin. So that's really just like a MIDI sequencer, a little mini beat sequencer that you could use, and use that beat sequencer to go to any MIDI device. And if that MIDI device, like Groove Agent, can fire off samples, that's where the samples would go, as opposed to here. So this just is a container for the MIDI data, so not the sample player itself. Okay. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to add a new track and point it to a specific view configuration rather than having a new track show up in all configured views? Currently, there isn't a way that I've found to do that. So if you have a number of different configurations that are set up for different views, like I want to see my drums or vocals, and you add a track, that track could show up in the predefined views. I'll mention that again, but there isn't a way to currently that I know of to have it not show up in all of the views afterwards. So sometimes when you have all your tracks done, then adding the views can make sense, but I can see where it could be a bit of an oversight and a little annoying. Okay. Okay, so question, looking for any tips on creating decent vibrato in the MIDI key editor. It could really depend, so some people will use, so let's say if I want to come here to Mellotron, some of them, depending on the instrument itself, sometimes you can get vibrato as you add modulation. If that particular sound is set up for this, so I move my modulation wheel, some sounds will do that. And otherwise, a lot of sounds, you could do kind of vibrato using like a pitch bend wheel. So it's not so much of what's being drawn in the Cubase editor, but what MIDI information the sound source is using to kind of simulate the vibrato. So it's usually going to be modulation, sometimes expression, depending on the sample library, or just pitch bend data. So you could use your MIDI controller to import all those different modulation sources. Okay. Okay, so just see a question, spectral layers. What's spectral layers? I've not got it. Spectral layers is a tool that Steinberg distributes. And what it allows you to do is to do very sophisticated pitch, like spectral editing. So a lot of times when we do editing of particular audio, as we cut all the frequencies. But what spectral layers is going to allow you to do, and this is a add-on, so it doesn't come with Cubase, but someone had asked about it previously, will allow you to do editing of specific frequency ranges of your audio. So this way, if we zoom in, you could see, different like three-dimensional views and be able to edit like only the high frequencies. So if you have like a squeak in a guitar, at this point you could choose to just kind of see your audio in kind of a more of a frequency based mode, and you could edit the audio based on that. So if you have a rumble, you could kind of get the low frequencies out, or someone kicked a microphone stand by accident, or if there's a lip smack that you wanted to get rid of, you could just kind of edit those particular frequencies. So it's very sophisticated algorithms for doing that. So, and you could use it in conjunction with ARA2 inside of Cubase, or you could use it in conjunction with Wavelab as well. All right. All right, so we have Jazz Dude, I see is on a Hangout. It's great to have you on board. Okay, so I see a question from Ace. I got a new PC and upgraded to Groove Agent 5. When working on an old project, I get error for missing sounds from Groove Agent 1. Where can I download those old Groove Agent 1 sounds? Where to install? So you could actually still download the original Groove Agent 1. I may have it on this computer. I think I did it recently for a similar question. But when so let's say if I come over here to my VST instruments, so I thought I had downloaded it, but when you go to Groove Agent, so let's say if I come over here and I go to add a particular instrument and I add Groove Agent, so you can download the original Groove Agent 1 still. I'm not sure if it's going to work on Catalina or not if you're on Mac. But when you do go to, let's say, even Groove Agent SE, all the sounds from Groove Agent 1 are included. So when you go to, say, load kit with patterns and we go to look, you'll see the original Groove Agent 1. So all of those kits are still there. So you can think of Groove Agent SE as kind of, kind of a further extension of Groove Agent 1, but all your Groove Agent 1 content is still visible. So if you get a message saying can't load, Maple Kit or whatever from, Collins Kit, whatever that you are working with, you could just go directly over here and just say, okay, let's load up our Maple Kit. Or I wanted to load up, whatever kit that's being referenced. So if you wanted to come here, let's say, okay, I want to go to Collins Kit. So kind of older analog drum machine sound. So all the content is still available and loads directly into Groove Agent SE or Groove Agent 5. Okay. So just see question, apologies, Greg. The back and forward buttons in the main window make editor window go to back. I need it to stay current even if it's not full screen. Let me see if this is maybe I'll just try to scroll back a little bit and see if this is, it might be and just referring to previous topic we covered. Let me see if I could find it quickly. Just scrolling back in time. Just bear with me. Sorry. And I think this might be about the undo, redo buttons on the event editor. So let me see if we go back. Sorry, just lots of discussion. Thanks for all the great comments and discussions. Okay, just catching up on different comments. Okay, so I just see a question from Ram. Good to see you on a Hangout. Hey, Greg, is there any functionality for folks trying to access Cubase remotely? I use Chrome Remote Desktop to access all my machines. If I do playback, I obviously can't hear anything. I know some people that will set up Team Viewer for kind of remote access, and then maybe I think there's some people will have I know, so I think that could work. And you could probably have the audio output through something like OBS for kind of if you needed to monitor. I used to use the Chrome Remote Desktop, but I think TeamViewer is probably like the best solution for that. But then to get the audio, you might want to leave your computer set up and maybe have the audio output through OBS, and then you could hear it on a source like this or through Zoom. So some people do that as well, but I think probably the best remote desktop functionality is probably going to be TeamViewer, and there's free versions of that for personal use. All right, let me just see if I could continue on, get back to where we were. Okay, just kind of catching up. Sorry about that. Okay, so it says is question or comment. Apologies, Greg, and I think this is with the main editor or the editor screen. So it says the back and forward buttons in the main window make the editor window go to back. I need it to stay focused even if it's not full screen. Thank you. So it could be maybe what's going on is like, the back arrows here may carry over. So let's say if I'm in this, so try, if you hit the tab key, see if it makes any difference. I'm not sure if I'm understanding between the two different comments, but maybe if you hit the tab key here, you could, if you have an editor window, we could have these kind of sync if you want, if this is activated in the editor window. But if I'm here, if I don't have that activated, we could kind of choose to rewind, fast forward, but these could be independent size. So if I wanted to have this be a different size, but I think I'm misunderstanding. So maybe if you could ask the question all together so I don't have to scroll back. Sorry for being dense and slow. All right. Okay, let me see if I catch up to live chat here. Okay, I'm just going to check my other feed and see if we have, see where I am, if the chat's different there. All right, so let me just scroll back. All right. Okay, all right, so my chat's updated here. Let me just scroll back. All right, just bear with me a little bit. Sorry. All right, still finding. I thought, wow, I got to the end of the discussion and then realized it updated and. Okay, so I may have lost some timeline, but let's see if I go back. So sorry if I lost some questions. Okay, so seeing some discussion on render in place. Okay, so it says from Iran, how can buy e-licensors send to Iran, Tehran? So I'm sure, wherever you buy normal musical equipment, that the Steinberg e-licenser is available. I'm not sure who does, if it's a Yamaha subsidiary, it might be like Yamaha based in Abu Dhabi, maybe, that handles Iran. I'm not absolutely sure, but it should be anywhere that you can get any musical equipment. You should be able to find an e-licenser, but I'm not I don't know the Iranian distribution as well as I do the American. Okay, so just see a question. Hey, Greg, how do you write a hit song? You get very lucky. So it's kind of in jest. Okay. So question, hello, Greg. I've lost the controls on my interface. A Zoom R16. The controls play sounds from Hallian. Any ideas? Perhaps a routing problem. Thank you. So if you had remote controls, they may be working through like a Mackie control for transport. So what you want to do is go to your studio setup and try going, and you might have to add like a Mackie control or some kind of control. Once you have that set up, set this for your Zoom, and that will be like the MIDI communication, and it could be over the USB driver. Set this for your Zoom in and out, and then you should be able to probably control the transport. And if you notice that it's still kind of playing different MIDI notes as you hit the transport, if we go to your MIDI port setup, I think if we go to your studio setup, and go to your MIDI port setup, where you see the driver here, your Zoom driver, and you'll see for in all MIDI, uncheck that, or disable that, and then it's not going to just play back MIDI notes for the selected audio device. Okay. So I see, hi Greg, is it possible to change the meter color of the master meter? Thanks. So there were some slight changes. So let's say if I wanted to come here, I think that these metering options, so as we play, these will be kind of global for all the channels, and we could change the appearance of those. So if we go to the preferences and and there's some changes with this in 10.5.2 that were recently released a couple of weeks ago. So if you go to your metering, you can go to your metering appearances. So we could have, for different meter types, you could come over here and set up for each of the metering scales that you have here, you could have different color schemes. So you could change the color there. That would be kind of global. So if you switch this to, full digital. You could have a completely different metering scale color if you switch it to EBU, to, CAT System 20 or K14 or plus 12 dB digital. You could have these all set up, but it's going to be global, the same metering colors for the master as opposed to the channel. So the master meter won't be an independent color. Okay. Okay. Just seeing, Greg, the AKG 240 headphones you mentioned, are they the studio version of the Mark II, if you know? I think I have them within arm's reach. Let me see. So I just have the K240 Studio. So I'm not sure what the difference between the K240 and the Mark II are off the top of my head. I'm not an AKG expert. Okay. Okay, so just reading through comments. Okay, so I see lots of people using Babyface Pro, not having any problems. Okay, so different discussion of audio interfaces that people are using. Okay, just all right. So people have migrated from different interfaces to other ones. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. How do you quantize audio, for example, bass signal without using audio warp instead of using splice is when you quantize drum multiple files? So you could kind of treat, depending on the bass line itself. Let me just open up a project that might make a little more sense for a bass part for this. Just get this project open here. That wasn't the one I was thinking of. Let me just... All right, just let me open up a different project. This might have a little more, and it could really depend upon the bass part itself, how you want to quantize it. So if I'm here, let's say I think... So if I wanted to do like slices, you could kind of treat it the same way as you do drums. So if you want to go to your hit points, and let's say you wanted to slice, create slices. And now as we come over here, and then if I want to quantize it to eighth notes, just come right here, hit set my quantize value, and then let's hit Q. So it's probably not the best part to do that, but let's say if I want to do maybe 16th notes. Versus kind of I'll just put in my auto fades so I don't have those clicks between. So that's how you could kind of quantize the bass the same way as you do drums. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, when exporting an audio mixdown, if the sample rates are the same, what could cause the, I'm not sure, I think we're missing kind of keyword, but maybe the pitch to be lower in the exported file. You know, if the sample rates are the same, maybe the playback source, I'm not sure if it's being imported directly back into Cubase. So one thing to do if you're doing an export and and it's coming out a different pitch, one thing to kind of check would be to just kind of, so as we come over here, one thing to check would be, as you do an export audio mixdown, is just to, import the file directly back into the project first. And then you could see if there's going to be a sample rate mismatch. I know some people will do everything at 48K and then they burn a CD at 44.1 and then the pitch is lower. So depending on where you're listening to, but you could check pretty immediately just as a safety reference. I think even in this project, if we go all the way down to the bottom, a lot of people will just do a 24, like a mix down and store it within a project as a reference that they could pass on to other people. So check, if you do an export audio mix down, maybe it's the same sample rate as it was, but maybe the playback device that you're using is playing at a different sample rate. So okay. Okay, so so I just see comment, how does Greg's left/right interface looks different with lines pointing? So I'm not sure if I understand the question. So maybe if you could reiterate it, we could maybe catch it towards the end. And it says in the mixer. So let's say if I come over here to, so how does Greg's left-right interface looks different with lines pointing in the mixer? So I'm not sure if I understand a question, but maybe if you could give an idea. Okay. Okay, so just seeing, I think this might be someone who's maybe indicating a Cubase was hard to use, says I'd love to learn from him, but I need to just start, for example, if I want to put waves, plug-in compressor and stuff, and not really easy. So, if you wanted to, put plugins on, you could just go to your inserts, and then you'll see kind of all your plugins on your system. You could even just go to your inserts and type in the plugin name. So if you're looking for a particular Waves plugin, you could just type in or whatever and just type in the first couple letters and then hit enter. So, but let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so it says, "Hi, Greg. Question: what is the best way of creating large orchestral templates without using much system resources?" So if you have it gets to be kind of the either or scenario a lot. So you could have a huge orchestral template on a huge system, but if you have one that's kind of set up, if you have a modest computer and you still want access to a lot of different orchestral samples, let me just find one, see if I have kind of a quick orchestral thing I could open up. So one way of kind of allocating resources for different projects is as we kind of work, let's say, and as I wanted to work with this, you could select, like, for the tracks you're not using, like if you don't have any data on them, you could just come right over here and just disable the tracks. So if it's not being used, I know a lot of people kind of have everything kind of up and ready to go, but if you have a more modest powered computer and you want to have access to a large template, try to just simply enable and disable tracks. So you could have everything kind of loaded up, and as you go to use it, just click enable track, disable track, and that will kind of free up the memory and the computer's resources and not have that particular track active. So that would be a good way to kind of use your CPU a little more intelligently. Okay, so it says, "For all Cubase masters here, please post lots of videos. I'd love to subscribe and learn more and be paid student in the future. I believe so many people want to learn this amazing DAW." So yeah, you could definitely, check out, I think on the actual Cubase channel, we obviously produce materials so that people can get the most out of Cubase. And I think it's by far the most widely available, the deepest resources, or you're just going to find on the youtube.com/Cubase. And you could go through these indexes, which are also, all of the Hangouts, so you've probably done, 120 hours of Hangouts since March, and all of the Hangouts are indexed. So you could just, look at different topics and go to direct things if you have particular questions on it. Okay, so just seeing, this is probably getting back to our quantizing of, as we work with slices, like as we quantize the bass part. So once you kind of create the slices, it will translate that part. You have an event editor and a part editor. So that will be a part editor, but you could still go through and kind of treat it the same way and quantize. But and if you wanted to get back, you could just select the audio file itself, and from the audio menu, you can just choose to dissolve part, and that will get you back to where you were previously. So if you needed to do like fade handles and stuff like that. All right, so we see Michael from Weatherford, Texas is finally here. He's probably been in for an hour or so, and I'm behind. All right. Okay, just going through more comments. Okay, and once again, if we could try to avoid asking the same questions over and over again, it just kind of clogs up the data stream in the chats for me to go through. So we'll try to get through every question as we can chronologically. Sometimes You will have so much chat that some of the comments will get lost as I get kind of farther and farther behind. So if we could try to avoid asking the same questions repeatedly, that would be appreciated on my end. Okay, just okay. So you see, question, Greg. The comma does RTZ, like a return to zero. But if my first track starts at say 1.05 and I'm mixing, what key command takes me back to the start of my first track? If you have that set with a lot of times, what I do as you're kind of working on a particular project is I may just select all of the events. I hit like Command or Control A, and then hit the letter P, and that will set the left and right locator. And this will be handy, and that sets the left and right locator around all of the events, and that's handy when you want to do your final mix down. So if you hit comma, that'll take you to 0. But if your first event starts at 1.05, at that point, if you selected all the events with Command or Control plus A, you could just hit the number 1 key, and that will take you directly to the first event. And if you hit the 2 key, that will take you to the end of the song. So those are some good keyboard shortcuts. So I like to have the left and right locators that are, as my song is, the form is kind of set, I set that around the entire event, and then you could just hit 1 to go to the beginning of the project on the numeric keypad. Okay. See, great question. The Beatles' Abbey Road trick was to record at Abbey Road. That helps. Okay. Okay, just reading through different comments. Okay, so we have a question. What is the best way to split a multi-song project into single song projects, please? Okay, so let me just recreate this really quickly. Okay, so let's say if we have like maybe a live thing. So I'll just select all. Okay, so let's say we had like a multi-song project, and I will just make these into contiguous audio files by doing a bounce selection. Okay, so what I would do to kind of split these up, one is to figure out if you really do need to split them up. What you could do is, let's say if we add a marker track. So I could take my range selection, let's say of these events here, and then on the marker track, we could add, I will hit P. I kind of set the range, and then I'll just click on add cycle marker. And you could give this marker a name. So I will come over here, hit P. Okay, so now we have, let me just set this one up. I forgot to add the cycle marker. So I'll take each song with the range tool, define the end and the start, and then just hit the letter P, and that moves the left and right locators, and then you could add the cycle marker. So now you have 4 cycle markers. If I wanted to go through and name the cycle markers, we could just kind of come over here. So if I was mixing everything together, once I have the cycle markers set, I could come right over here and just do an audio mix down, and then we could mix down and choose to mix down based on cycle markers. So I could do a batch export or just do stereo outs, and this would give me 4 independent audio files. So I'm going to choose to just do a quick stereo mix down of all these projects. So I have one kind of longer project, and then I could have different songs within that one contiguous project that are defined by the cycle markers. So if I wanted to export these, I'll give these kind of a unique name. I'll just put them onto my desktop. Okay, and I'm going to actually choose a different naming scheme where instead of the name, I'm just going to use the cycle marker name. And now as I do this, we'll export audio. And it's going to take each of the songs and bounce it down independently based upon the cycle markers. Okay, so now I'll just hit OK, and now we can see each of the songs have been exported, and I can do that for a batch export or a straight audio mix down. Now, if you wanted to do kind of a different way where I just wanted to take this whole project, what I could do is hold down Command or Control plus Shift. And here I could select kind of my in-point and out-points globally using the range selection tool. So if I just wanted to get rid of all the stuff I'm not using, I'm just concentrating on this one particular aspect, and I don't want to see the other parts that are not in my area of focus at the time, go to your Edit tool and then go to Range and just choose Crop. And then everything else will be kind of done away with. So once again, select the range, go to Edit, to Range, and then choose Crop. And then, so that's a couple of ways of working with multiple projects within this, how to split a multi-song project to single song projects. So you may not have to, but you could do the range crop if you needed to. See a nice comment from Gareth. Learned about tempo detection on Hangouts. Great stuff. Yeah, it's very powerful once you start working with it. It solves a lot of problems. Okay, so I see a question. Routing a signal from a channel to a group channel, and from there to other group channels, and finally to the master mix. Does this cause latency between the different channels? No, the latency is automatically compensated for. So wherever you have plugins and audio being routed, it's going to play back in time, and it's offset internally to automatically make everything work in time. And the reason we do that is because it's kind of the right thing to do. Okay. So I see in our comment from Gareth, any new users look for advanced mixing and composition and editing with Greg Ondo on YouTube. Sonic Scoop, great summary of unique Cubase features from Greg. Yeah, it's kind of a typical what I would do, kind of like a dealer presentation for customers. But thanks for the kind words, Gareth. But yeah, that's a good overview of Cubase if you haven't kind of seen it in action. Okay. Okay, so I see just a comment. I think it was addressed to Gareth. Do you know how to set up a computer to set all the RAM for Cubase versus in excuse me, in MZ case? So basically, the operating system will allocate the memory the computer is using. Some of the plugins. Let me just cough really quick. I'm gonna. All right, so some of the plugins can have different memory allocation systems, like for samplers. But basically, the operating system, will allocate the RAM usage by itself. Okay, so just see a nice comment from Paul. Thanks so much for these, Greg. You help out so much. I'm glad to be helping people. So hope everyone's learning a tip or trick. And if you learned something new, please feel free to give a thumbs up and make sure that you actually are subscribed to the channel. So as notifications for future Hangouts come over. Okay. Okay, so hello. How can I copy the length of MIDI notes from one track to another? Example, Alt MIDI track to or Alt MIDI track to a tenor, Alto MIDI track to a tenor MIDI track. So let's see if we could do that quickly. Let me just create a new project here. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Okay, so let's just... All right, so I'll just go ahead and record some really horrible keyboard playing in. All right, and I'll not have my punch in, punch out active. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's say if I had copied this over. And I'm just going to change the length on it. Let me just get these synced up. Okay, so when I come here, all right, so you can see kind of the two different MIDI parts, and we just see if there's something with if I take this particular part here, and I'm going to make these different colors. Okay, so I'm going to take, let's say, the red part, and let's see if I drag this in here. And now I have that as a preset. And let me see if I come here. And quantize between those two. So I thought that might work. There may be. So I thought that there was some, if you see, you can see both events here simultaneously. And if you wanted to switch, but I thought that there was maybe like a quantize method. But here you could just kind of edit. And once you have kind of one done, let me just see if I maybe group these together, if it carries over into the editor. So I don't know a good way off the top of my head to do it. I'm sure that there's some way of doing it, but there used to be like old Cubase, like going back to Atari, like a match quantize tool that was really good at that type of stuff. But I'll see if I can play around with it. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so I see a suggestion, cut up these streams into different topics you've explained, and then links in the table of contents of the Cubase manual so that we can watch your explanations. So pretty much all the topics are indexed. A lot of times the Cubase manual may not show you how to take 3 or 4 parts of the program to come up and solve a problem for you, but it may show you what each of those parts does. So there may not be a direct link to the Cubase manual. So, but thanks for the comment. Okay, just going through different comments again. Thanks for all great discussion. Okay, so we have a workflow question. If you have buses for guitar tracks, a mix bus for all the guitar buses, a pre-master bus, and a master bus, where would you put the compression, high and low pass, and EQ, etc.? I would probably, if it's needed, I would probably do it, on the initial tracks. Compression, you may want to take several, if applicable, and it could be different for every song. Like, if you had like 3 or 4 kind of like funk guitar parts, you may want to compress those together as a bus, but depending on the, how many guitar parts you have, I would probably start making sure that the original source sounds good and then maybe a touch of bus compression. That's probably what I would do, but each song could present different requirements. So there's no real perfect answer. Just do whatever is right for the song. But I would probably lean more towards, if you wanted to have a guitar group, maybe a little bit of compression and dynamics control there to kind of make it sound a little more homogeneous. and kind of more of a collective entity, and then treat the different. And at that point you could treat the individual guitar parts, but you might as well kind of fix the problem as close to the source as possible if needed. Okay, just going through different comments. So people discussing, if you're doing a lot of sample based, like, orchestration, that, RAM is helpful. So, and someone mentioning that they loaded up their home tower to 128 gigs of RAM, and that it made a big difference. Okay, thanks for all that you do, Greg. I've learned a lot from these Hangouts. How would you go about finding the BMP, I assume BPM, of a vocal a cappella? All you have to do is kind of the same same process that you would do for any audio. So one of the things you could do, there's a couple of different ways. You could do tempo detection. So let's say if I wanted to, so let's say if we jump to this project, and at this point, let's say if we're just listening to the vocal,
What did you say?
so say, if I wanted to select this audio, you might be able to do just a tempo detection. Sometimes, of just an a cappella vocal may not be the best function for tempo detection, but it can't hurt to see what results it gives you. So again, I'll just come over here. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is all different parts. So I'm going to separate. I'm going to just bounce selection. And then try tempo detection. We'll see what it... But another method that you might want to do is just to do a tap. So create a MIDI track. And what I'm going to do now is, like, as I listen to the vocal,
Did you say
I'll turn off the metronome.
you wished it
And then I could
all away?
just kind of place this track into record.
I'm left here for 1,000 years and a day.
And just hit kind of tap in with a MIDI keyboard.
You were the part.
And then at that point, you could just take kind of the existing MIDI part and come over here and go to MIDI to, and I think it's under functions. You can say merge tempo from tapping and say, okay, I tapped in quarter notes, and then have it automatically figure out the tempo based on what you tapped in. So there's a couple of different methods you could use for determining tempo of a cappella vocals. The tempo detection is going to be more ideally suited if you have actual more percussive or more rhythmic elements. It's helpful for that. Okay. So see question, hey, is Cubase support just a myth? I know we have in the US, full-time people, full-time team based in Carmel, Indiana. I know that there's, different support throughout, handled in Europe through Steinberg as well, and different distributors will have different support. So there is lots of support, and, we obviously do these hangouts as well to help people out. Okay, reading through different comments. So people bragging on their 128 gigs of RAM. So it's great if you have it. All right. I'm just jealous. All right. So let's see. Okay, so see a comment from Nick. Hi, Greg. I'm feeling like something is off timing in Cubase. All of a sudden, hearing flamming with drum and click stuff that I never used to hear. This is new. Maybe I hit some kind of preference. Check. One thing to check is if you get to your studio setup and if you go to your VST audio system, there can be record shift options and adjust for record latency. I would check those things. As you're printing, you may also want to try to toggle the constrained delay compensation and see if that makes a difference. But I think it's probably going to be one of those things. So maybe if you have a plugin that's reporting incorrect latency to the host, like Cubase, you do that. But if you have plugins on your master effects, it could be something like that. But try disabling the constrained delay compensation. Okay, so seeing a lot of people, recommending always use VST3 when possible. The VST2 plugin spec is probably 16 years old now. So okay, reading through different comments. A lot of great discussion. Okay, so when disabling enabling effect, why does the sound go away for half a second and plays again? Is PC empty slow to process and give me audio instantly or latency? Again, it's just to make sure that when you do that track is being the latency is being compensated for. So we covered that a little bit earlier. Okay, just reading through great comments. Okay, so just different people helping each other out. Okay, so see a question. Multiple monitors, piano roll on left. on left monitor, main project on main monitor. If I switch MIDI track in the project window, the piano roll jumps to the start of the part, not the playback. Any fix? So let's see if I have, I'll just open up, let's say I'll have a MIDI track here. And I'll make this kind of a floating window, but smaller. And let me just switch this to velocity only. Okay, so let's say I have this part, and I open up into main window here. Okay, so let's say we're playing along.
Where do I go from here? Where do I go from here?
And so let's just say,
Where do I go?
I think I've messed up all my tempos, so we'll just ignore that.
Where do I go from here? Where do I go from here? Where?
Let me just revert this so it doesn't sound so... I like the song too much to destroy it like this. All right.
I'm on the outside looking in. You put the close side up on your heart.
I'm just going to switch my preference over. So when I hit the key command, it'll automatically, or double click, it'll open in a separate window.
You were the party, the big event. I was your everything.
So it seems like when I jump
I'm uninvited.
between my different songs here, so if I go here,
Outside looking in, you put the close side up on your heart. All the lights went out and it got dark. Where
that all those seem to kind of be playing along as expected. I don't know if it's possible if you want to upload a video and and send me a link to download to see what's going on in your monitor, but it seems like it's going along. You know, make sure that each of your editors is set to the auto scroll and that it's set to page scroll, but I know it's not on separate monitors, and I don't have two monitors set up currently in my system, but check to make sure you have the auto scroll active. But it seems to be kind of going as expected and not to the start of the part. But let's see if there's any preferences that might cause that. I'd take a quick look, maybe under editing. Yeah, I don't see anything that kind of, just look in here, see if there's anything that might be causing something like that. So maybe if yours is behaving kind of differently than that, but I usually run two screens on my studio setup and I haven't noticed that. Just seeing another comment about instrument sync issues. Use 5-pin DIN over USB to sync your external devices. USB is the enemy. Connect all your instruments to the interface with 2 cables in and out in daisy chain. So that might be getting back to our comments previously on, on syncing modular stuff. So. Okay, just reading through comments here. And there are people mentioning that network cards and USB interfaces are often the biggest culprits in DPC latency monitoring that it comes up with. See a comment on Love Magneto, use it all the time. Yeah, still a wonderful plugin. Okay. Okay, so see a comment from Gareth. Thanks for the heads up on spectral layers. Yeah, you could definitely check out I think there's trial versions of it. Check it out. So it's a wonderful tool. If you have to do a lot of de-squeaking of acoustic guitars, it's it's a perfect solution for that. Okay, more discussion about DPC latency mon. It says, you see a question, if anyone used Cubase with Zoom, it seems it works only with Pro Tools. There's lots of people that are outputting their audio, via Zoom. So there's a number of different ways of doing it. Some people, I think on a Mac, there's actual a core audio driver that some people use. But, what I do for my setups is, take audio out of one interface into another interface and kind of separate the Zoom, but a lot of people use different plugins that could be used for that, or so there's a number of people using Cubase with Zoom. I've done a lot of Zoom demos in the stay home era here. Okay, so just saying, Sir Robert says, great, I want all those old Groove Agent sounds. Yep, they've probably all been there the whole time. So you just have to open them up. So all the original Groove Agent 1, which is a great collection of, a lot of electronic sounds. Okay, I think my timeline jumped ahead. Let me just get back. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, so just scrolling back. Sorry, might get behind in the discussion too much. Okay, so getting close to where we were. Okay. Okay, so okay, does it make sense to work with ASIO for all for an audio interface that runs in sync with a PCI Express card? I'm not sure, if if you absolutely need to use the ASIO for all. So if you need it to run in sync with a PCI Express card, you could do that. It may not synchronize It's not going to properly synchronize the two audio interfaces in a clocking standpoint unless you have both interfaces clocked, one as a master, one as kind of the prominent display, or one as kind of the that follows. So, but the ASIO for all may not provide the clocking to properly sync. You could send audio out of multiple interfaces, but it may not be perfectly in time. Okay, so Greg, I'm thinking about workflow. I drop one audio sample and I want to change the pitch. What's the best way to drag it to the sample control? If you want to change the pitch of one sample, you know, you could do it directly from the main timeline. So say if I wanted to come here, so say if I have something is a bit pitched like that, I could drop this into the project. I'll move it over here. So if you want to, let's say, you know, as we play this particular patch or this sound, I'll just do a new project here really quickly. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's the sound we had before. So I'm just going to drop this into. So if you just select the pitch here, you could just, or select the event rather, you could just go directly on the transpose. So that's one way, or you could, you know, drag it directly to a sampler. So, and now at this point we could click on the audio warp and I could just, it'll play back the same length. So those are a couple of different ways of being able to quickly pitch audio. Okay, so okay, let's go on through some more comments. Okay, so hey Greg, I need to make the mod wheel on Dark Planet automate the sound I'm using. How's that done? So let's just come over here to Dark Planet quickly. So I think it could depend upon the patch itself, but if come over here, let's just go to edit. So by default, I'm just using my modulation wheel. So you could just record that as MIDI CC data. You could also just kind of right click and learn CC and move a knob, and as you play any particular note, you could do that as well. So if you say, okay, I want to add more grain, learn CC. So, you know, so those are some ways that you could have different parameters in Dark Planet be automated via your mod wheel. Okay, we have a question from Terry. Hi, Greg. Question: can Steinberg make it possible to provide us with a dialog box that pops up what we can use in the logical editor, or can we fill in the variable we enter in the dialog box? So I'm not sure if it's going to show up in, so let's say if we open up the Logical Editor. Let me change my preference back. So if we have some, all right, and now we can go to the Logical Editor. I think it's, so I think you want to see maybe like which particular parameters are available here for maybe like for value 1, value 2, value 3. So it's, I wouldn't anticipate that happening because, you know, a lot of things. So if that's what kind of the value is, or like when you come here to, and one thing to also be aware of is, you know, you could just kind of select different values and hit a MIDI message to change the note or pitch. Or to capture in MIDI CC data, but there, if you're confused on like on a MIDI note message, what's value 2 versus a MIDI CC modulation, or what's value 1 on pitch bend, there is in the documentation kind of a chart that can help you with that. So if that's what you want to do, but you know, but I would maybe, you know, and after a while, you know, you can figure out kind of, okay, these are the different value MIDI values for different messages. So. Okay, so we're seeing Ambient Dave. Said to check out. It's probably been a while, but great to have you on the Hangout. Remember, we'll do the next one on Thursday. For those that weren't on a Hangout at the beginning, because of Friday being a holiday, we're going to do the next Hangout on Thursday. So look for that in 2 days. Okay. Okay, just reading through different questions. Okay, question: how to download Cubase free? There isn't a free version. If you buy different audio hardware from third-party companies, you can get a Cubase LE often included with that. So if you have like a Zoom recorder, if you get a Yamaha or Steinberg interface or device, often you get a Cubase AI version. There are Cubase trial versions that are available as well, but there's no free version of Cubase. Okay, so see, question. I might be a bit dumb here, but I'm trying to get used to Hallian. I can see MIDI data to my channel list added Hallian instrument, but cannot get MIDI to the actual instrument. So, you know, if you're working with this, you know, probably the best way to kind of get started with Hallian. Okay, so it says I can see MIDI channel on list added Hallian instrument, but cannot get MIDI to the actual instrument. So if you get MIDI normally, you know, what I would do is, you know, add an instrument track and choose Hallian here. So under sampler. And then you could load up a particular sound. So let's say if I wanted to come over here to, let's say studio strings, I'll just kind of come right over here. And then, you know, once you have that, if you have your preferences set, we have a sound. So as you load this in now, Hallian can have 4 MIDI ports, so you could have 64 channels. You want to make sure that that is set. So so if you add an instrument track, that will automatically kind of, set the routing for that particular instrument for you. Make sure that you have the track record enabled. So I press my MIDI keyboard, nothing is being passed to it. And as soon as I press that down, so you could just kind of come right over there and just start playing instantly, just like any other. And just like any other VST instrument. So it doesn't really work any differently than other MIDI instruments, but be aware that you could have, 64 MIDI channels of different MIDI ports, so that when you go to set up your outputs, and you have the right MIDI port assigned to it. And you could also check to see if you get sounds playing just a keyboard here. That means that the instrument is loaded and the patch is loaded. If you don't get sounds here, that means that probably no patch is loaded. And if there's no patch loaded, no matter what you have here, it's just going to play back empty. So. Okay, and I just see that I can hear audio when I use the on-screen keyboard, so that's good. So check just to make sure that, you have the right MIDI port, right MIDI channel, and you have this enabled, and it's really just the same way as any other VST instrument. Okay, so just saying other people, make sure you have the right MIDI channels assigned to it. Okay, so just reading through different comments here. Okay, guys, can I drag an audio into sampler control and then drag it back in the project? So I think it's just going, if it's in the sampler control, like if you, like, let's say if I have this audio file in a sampler track, so let me just see if I have this as a sampler track here. That little loop. But I think if we just go to your pool menu, so we could just, if we go to your pool window here, I think it's just going to show up under sampler track. And then you'll just have that audio file there. Then you could just drag that back right onto your timeline. Okay, so just kind of move on. Okay, so I saw a question sent email on your 816C issue with Cubase. Did I get it? I don't think I got it. I'll take a quick look at my email and see if it's... Sometimes people send the questions after the Hangout gets started. Yeah, so it came in the middle of the Hangout. Let me see if I could read it. Okay, so it says I switched from UR22C to UR816C. I love the device, but having difficulty in Cubase. The problem is that any project that I recorded with the UR22, the 816 won't show up. It keeps bringing up the 22C, even if I select the 816 channel. As soon as I hit enter, it reverts back to 22C. I found a workaround by adding tracks with 816, then deleting 22C. tracks. This is a pain question. Is there a way to change the input permanently to default to the 816 instead of the 22C? So what I would try, generally I would, if you start up when you start up Cubase, I would maybe save it with this, I'm not sure if you're still using the 22C. So if you migrated to the UR816C, it may, and you have the UR22C, those projects will try to switch to the same audio interface. So what you could do, what I would try to do is, if you have the UR22C and the 816C connected at the same time, is just to disable it. If you plan on just kind of moving over to the 816C altogether, and kind of replacing the UR22C in your setup, I would, disconnect it and maybe take the UR22C DSP mix effects and remove that from your computer. You could uninstall the drivers depending on I don't remember if you indicated if you were Mac or PC, but I would load up the projects and just save it with the UR 816C. So, and I would come over here, and as you do that, before right after you open a project, go to your audio connections and try just, saving your inputs and your output configuration, and saving that directly for saving presets that are configured for your UR816C. Sometimes I've seen people also just have a particular template that always starts off, and then that will be for a particular interface, and sometimes at different sample rates. They'll have different templates for different sample rates, and then you'll be able to kind of work with that a little more. That will kind of start it on a UR816C. But if the project was saved with the 22C and it's still connected, it may still try to access it. But I could play around with it a little bit. I don't have an 816C, but I have kind of a UR44C and a UR24C that I could hook up and try to switch back. So if you want to email me again in the next day or two, I'll see if I could play around with it and come up with maybe a method that might work more consistently for you. Okay, so we had a question, and this is referring previously to the topic of left-right panning. I was thinking on panning. At some point, it was different looking interface in the panning for the left and right channels. So let me just jump back to my mix console. So it could be that when I had let's navigate over here. And when I go to, let me just switch to a different project quickly. There's two different panning modes in Cubase. So you could have, let me just kill my 5. If you see this is because there's a 5.1 output. So if this panning looks different here, that could be because there's a 5.1 out. And then if I remove the bus, the 5.1 out, we'll see back to a normal pan setting. So it could be maybe that one project had a 5.1 out, but there's also a combined panner here where you could have you're panning mostly to the left or right, and you could have varying amounts of width. And you could also kind of invert that if you hold the mouse down and move straight up. But if it was like it was before, it could be that maybe it's set for a 5.1, but there you could switch between two different stereo panners where you could have a balance. And this is often kind of the typical default, or you could just right click here and have a combined panner as well. Okay, so we have a question or comment. Cubase has low latency compared to Ableton. When I play piano tech at 32 samples, is there anyone can explain this? Why? Use a 2013 Mac and 2014 MacBook Pro. So it's, you'll hear, I think that the audio engine in Cubase and the engine is probably just a bit more robust than some other applications. So it's what people keep telling me. I don't use other applications really. Okay, so hey Greg, how do I use the elastic algorithm to achieve tape stop? When I do this with a tempo track, the rest of the project gets thrown off tempo when I bring up the initial tempo. So, the tape stop, if you use the elastic, will be, straight. It will be global for the project. But if you wanted to just have a particular project with the tape stop, so let's say if I wanted to jump back to this project and I wanted to take all of my drums and put a tape stop just on my drums, we could use a plugin called Loop Mash FX. So let me just revert this quickly. So I'm going to select all of my drums. And I'll add a effects. I'll add a group channel to all the selected channels. So we'll make it stereo. And one thing that you could do is just put on a Loop Mash FX, because the other way would just, again, make it. So as we do this, so say I'll bring my drums up. Then you could just kind of trigger these different tape stops, like on your drums. So you could do this, or you could do this globally, but if you want to just take all your drums. So you could do stuff like that. And you could actually just play this in real time via MIDI. So, using the tape algorithm will be global. But try using the Loop Mash FX. Okay. So I see from Omar from France. Hello, I have Avid Artist series controller that work with other DAW, but not with Cubase 10.5. Any ideas? Yeah, it definitely works with Cubase, Steinberg, and Euphonics, the people that made the controllers. We co-developed Yukon together way back when. But what you probably need to do is just get your studio set up and then come right over here. And you just want to make sure, I think you may have to just come right over here and just define your Yukon device. So you have to make sure that the software is installed, but just go to your studio menu to studio, click on studio setup, click on the plus, and then just add Yukon, and then just tell it where the drivers are. So Cubase definitely works with the Avid Artist series, it was originally Euphonics Artist series. Okay, so I see a question. Sorry, sir. What is the mix console? So the mix console is this part of the software where we could control the volume, panning, and this kind of mimics what we see in large recording studios. We could add EQ. like in this section of the mixer. So if we wanted to add more bass or more treble, we could add different effects. So if I said, okay, this is a guitar part, I wanted to run it through different effects like reverbs, or even, I could have virtual effects, and Steinberg pioneered this whole concept where you have my VST amp rack. These are the things that you could do kind of in the mix console. So it's a software version of a mixer to combine all the different sources, automate them, add your different tonal characteristics such as your EQs. Every channel also has different plugins as a channel strip, like a noise gate, compressor. You could have a de-esser or envelope shaper, tape saturation, and built-in limiters. And unlike other, hardware consoles, you can freely just drag and drop to configure the signal flow order of these. So that's kind of what the mix console is from a very macro level. Okay, just reading through some different comments. I know we have a couple of questions that were sent in that we should get to. All right, so we had a question. I'm wondering if the logical editor can select notes based on the selected notes. Say you have 3 bars of 16th note hi-hats. I select the second bar, and now I want to turn this selection into having every other second note of that selection selected. Is this possible in an easy way? Thanks for taking the time to do these videos. They are much appreciated. I've learned so much. And this is from Krister Dreyer. All right, so I think he's on a Hangout, so he's probably waited very patiently for this. So let's say if I wanted to take, I think I did a particular project on this. So let me quickly revert. All right, so let's say if I have kind of super generic drum pattern here. All right, so let's say I just wanted to select these hi-hats and have every other one do something like maybe go down in velocity. So it's not playing the same boring hi-hat pattern, but I'm just going to take the selected ones. So I'll go to my logical editor and we'll jump right over here. And I think I even saved it as a preset. So I said select every other hi-hat and we'll minus 40 on velocity. So I have these hi-hats selected. So what I did is I set the filter target. In this, I set it to transform. If I just wanted to select the notes, I could just choose select as opposed to transform. But since I want to do something like drop the velocity, that's going to allow me to choose transform. So I'm going to say type is equal to note. And then I wanted to select the particular pitch. So I say pitch is equal to F#1, and this is my hi-hat. And then you could say, this is the tricky part, where you say the last event, and then you'll see under this condition, every other event, and go to event counter and hit 2. And then what I'm doing is, so basically I'm selecting every other F#1, and then in the action target, I want to take value 2 of a MIDI note message, which is velocity, and I want it to subtract 40. So now when I hit apply, that will just take those particular velocities of the hi-hat, very boring, and a little more musical. So that's how you could set up kind of a condition like that. So I'll leave that up for a minute. And then I also got a question emailed in from David and Kristen at Big Tent in Nashville. So missing you guys when I'm in Nashville. It says we have two Cubase 10 users who work on the same desktop computer running Windows 10. We both have separate Cubase dongles. One of the users has Waves plugin license on a USB drive and the other does not. The Waves plugins are installed on the desktop and need the USB to authorize. If the USB is not plugged into the desktop, Cubase stalls during scanning for VST plugins and will not open. Is there a way to create multiple sets of user settings depending on who is using Cubase so that Cubase only scans for certain plugins for the particular user who is opening Cubase, or is there any other solution? What I would try to do is to just come over here for each user. I know, for each user, if you go to edit, try saving a profile manager. And then at this point, you could have each person have their own profile. So when they go to start, they could start Cubase up and then, like if so-and-so is doing it next, they could start their Cubase. And at this point, just come over here and, start their profile, restart Cubase, and then it will start with their conditions. And the profile will store when we go into the VST plugin manager. So you could have plugin collections, ones that don't include the Waves plugins. I'm not sure if when you start, if the Waves plugins are still going to be scanned. But if you have this, I would try to set up a different a default plugin collection for each of these. So that, when you do that it may not reference. I'll try to install a Waves plugin I don't have a license for, which is all of them, and see if not having it in the currently active plugin collection within the profile bypasses it. If Cubase is getting stuck on startup, what you could do is hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift right after it double clicks. Then you could get into Cubase by just choosing to bypass all the third-party plugins. So you could try that. So I would try to save profiles with unique plugin collections and see if that works. And I'll do some more experiments and reach out to you if you want to email me or I know we're Facebook friends, so you could just reach out via Facebook. But I'll try to play around with it a little more tonight. All right, so with that, I think we've gone almost 3 hours and 55 minutes. So we're going to wrap up. My son's been incredibly patient, so I'm going to go hang out with him for a bit. I have some other work calls to take care of. We'll try to get the index done tonight for today's Hangout. Once again, if you missed it at the beginning, since it's a holiday for a lot of us on Friday, we're going to be doing the Friday Hangout on Thursday. And I have to be, I'm selling a house on Tuesday that the closing is happening for. So we'll probably do the Tuesday Hangout the following Monday. So look for the announcements. I should get them posted in the next couple days. So that way we can still get our 2 Hangouts in per week, even if my schedule we'll have to kind of change some of the dates to accommodate it. I try not to work on a holiday. But I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. I hope that everyone has learned a tip or trick. If you learned something new or like the Hangout, please tell your friends. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel. And also make sure that you give it a thumbs up. And we'll see you again on Thursday. So it's the day earlier than usual. And then the following Monday as opposed to Tuesday. Then I think after that, we'll be back on our normal schedule. But I want to make sure that we can still get our 2 Hangouts in per week. So with that, I hope that everyone stays safe and healthy. And we'll see you on Thursday and look for the announcement. Everyone, thanks for the questions. It's a thrill being able to speak to everyone from different continents. Really, it's always a joy for me being able to help you out. And I hope everyone learns something new. Take care, and we'll see you on Thursday. Goodbye.